Hey everyone, PV here, and welcome to my new YouTube video. This video is about the top 5 cards from Kaldheim. So the top 5 cards that I'm most excited to play with, and I think have the most potential to shape the formats. The focus will be on Standard, because that is naturally the format that is most affected by a new set release, since it's a much higher percentage of the cards in it. But I do think some of the cards have older format applications, and I'll talk about those in the video as well. But before we start, I have news. I started a Patreon. It's patreon.com/PVDDR, and it's totally optional. The channel is going to remain public forever, so you don't have to go there. But if you want to support my work a little bit more while getting some extra perks on top of it, you should check it out. The link will be in the description down below. And some of the things that you can get are early access to the videos, access to an exclusive Discord channel with Q&A, where I'll hold updates after every tournament that I play, with polls on what the bonus videos should be about. So make sure you check it out and see if there is something for you. And let's get started. In honorable mention, we have the pathways, the new lands that we get in Kaldheim, and that are definitely going to shape Standard. I would say that it is likely that they are the cards that influence Standard the most out of all the cards in the set, but they are kind of boring and not that exciting, and it would feel a bit like cheating to just put them, numbers 1 through 4 or whatever, just have pathways in there. So I'm putting them on honorable mention because they will definitely shape the format, but they're not really what I want to talk about in this video. But you do have to understand that they will change the format a lot, because mana bases are one of the most constraining things in any given format. If you just look at what decks exist right now, Gruul is a very good aggro deck, right? It has good cards and it has reasonable mana because it has a pathway. But let's look at Rakdos. There's no Rakdos aggro deck, and that is mostly because there is just no dual land for Rakdos, right? So there is a Rakdos mid-range deck, it plays 28 lands, and it still has horrible mana. So the deck basically doesn't exist because the mana is not good enough. And now the mana will be good enough, or it will be better at least. And take a deck like Golgari Adventures. There's no Golgari pathway, so the deck is just not playable. It's trying to play too many cheap spells in both colors. It just does not have a mana base to support that. Instead, people were playing Celestian Adventures, even though it had in theory worse cards, just because the mana was better. So a lot is going to change in Standard because the mana is going to change. There will be more possibilities now, and I think that's really exciting. So in honorable mention, the pathways will definitely change Standard a lot. In 5th place, we have a saga, and that is Binding the Old Gods. So that's 2, a black and a green. Chapter 1, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So any non-land permanent. Chapter 2, search your library for a forest, put it into play tapped, and then shuffle your library. And Chapter 3, creatures you control gain Death Touch until the end of the turn. And I think this is a card that's being slapped on a little bit because it's an uncommon. I think if it was a rare, people would be talking about it a lot more, and it easily could have been a rare on power level alone. The first chapter kills anything, which I think is very important in today's format. Cards like the Great Henge, Embercleave, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, even Trail of Crumbs, a bunch of sagas, just both old and new, are all cards that see a reasonable amount of play. And being able to kill any permanent, no questions asked, or any non-land permanent is a very strong effect. So I think just getting your 4 mana Sorcery Speed Vindicate, it's already okay. And then the second chapter is also a little bit better than it seems because you can get any forest. So it doesn't say basic forest. I saw a lot of people thinking, oh, this card just isn't good enough because I have to put a bunch of forests in my deck. No, you don't. You can get a Triumph, for example. You can get a Snow Duel, right, that has a forest type. So you don't need any basic forest in your deck to make use of this ability. And even though it will only speed you up in the very next turn, right, because you play this on turn 4, turn 5 you get it tapped, and then you end up accelerating from 6 to 8 is what you're actually getting, right? Or rather, you jump straight to 7, not 6 to 8. So it is low, but it is meaningful. Right, a lot of the time you are going to have uses for this land. And then the third effect is not that great. Creatures you control gain Death Touch until end of turn. It is not a bad effect, but it doesn't really go with what the rest of the card is trying to do, because it strikes me as a control card. But the reason I think this card will see a lot of play is not because of its power level alone, but how good it is with Yorion's Kainoman. Yorion was already one of the best cards in the format, right? It has been the centerpiece of many decks before and after its nerf. And I think this will just create an entirely new Yorion deck, because this card is really, really good with Yorion. It curves very well into it. You play it and you destroy a creature, And then on turn 5, you play the Yorion and you get to destroy another creature and you search for a land. So next turn you have more mana to work with, you're going to search for another land, and this deck can usually spend the mana very well. So I think, the fact that this is such a better curve with Yorion than Elspeth Conquers Death means that it almost certainly will see play. Sometimes alongside Elspeth Conquers Death, but sometimes without white at all in your deck. Right? I think you could see, a 4-color Yorion deck. You could see specifically Sultai Yorion, but you can also see Abzan Yorion. So I think this will increase the possibilities of the Yorion decks, but it will see play almost exclusively alongside Yorion. In number 4, we have Valki, God of Lies / Tibalt, Cosmic Imposter. So it's a god, right? So it has 2 sides. You can play whichever one of them you want at any given point. The first side is 1 and a black for a 2/1. When it enters play, each opponent reveals their hand, and you choose a creature to exile from their hand while Valki is in play. So if Valki ever leaves play, the creature goes back to their hand. Then you can play X and turn it into a creature that it has exiled that costs X. Right? So if you take a 3-drop from their hand, you can at any point play 3 and have Valki become that 3-drop. The backside is a Planeswalker. It's 5 black-red for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. And it has an emblem that you can play any card exiled by it as if it was in your hand using mana of any color. Its abilities all exile cards. Right? It's +2, exile the top card of each player's library. -3, exile a creature or an artifact. Or -8, exile all graveyards and add 3 red mana. Which means that, at any point you exile a card with any of these abilities, you can then cast it for the rest of the game. So it's a pretty strong card. The +2 is basically draw 2 cards. The -3 is kill a creature and draw that creature. And the -8 is just, Yawgmoth's Will for both graveyards for the rest of the game. And I think this card is quite good because of its flexibility. It is a reasonable 2-drop and then a reasonable 7-drop. And that's something that's very rare. Most of the time, your 2-drops are not reasonable on turn 7, and your 7-drops do nothing on turn 2. Right? So even though it might not be the literal best 2-drop that you can play or the best 7-drop that you can play, the fact that it works as either is very strong. And the 2-drop is just perfectly reasonable, right? It's a 2/1. You take away their curve, so even if they kill it, they get a creature back later in the game where it doesn't matter anymore. And sometimes it's just busted. Imagine that you were in the play and you play this against someone who had a Kroxa in hand. You take their Kroxa, and for 2 mana, you get an attacking Kroxa next turn. Right? Even if you have, if you're playing an older format where Uro is legal, you play that, you get Uro, then next turn you have an attacking Uro in play. So that is a just very, very strong card. Right? Obviously, it can be dealt with, but then that disrupts their curve as well. So I think as far as 2-drops go, Valki is still already good. And something that you can do a lot in Standard right now is that because of pathways, you can just play black and splash the Tibalt side. For example, imagine you have an Orzhov deck, and you have Valki as your 2-drop. Then you can also play some red-white pathways or black-red pathways, and sometimes you'll get to cast Tibalt in some of your games. So I think that is pretty strong and something we're going to see a lot more in the future, and this card will almost certainly see play. Especially because there are a lot of treasure-generating cards now in red, right? There's a dragon, there's the dwarf, and your 2-drop being a mana sink for your treasure cards that you can then cast as a 7-drop later in the game is quite powerful. So definitely a Standard staple for me. And I think it might also see play in older formats because of how it interacts with Cascade. So Cascade is a mechanic that says when you play a card with Cascade, you reveal cards from your deck until you hit a card with lower casting cost, and you get to play that for free. But because of the way the rules work, you can reveal Valki, which is the front side, which costs 2, but then choose which one you're going to play. So you can reveal Valki and play Tibalt. So if you play a card like Charlotte's Agent, right, you're going to reveal cards from top of your deck until you hit a card that costs 2 or less. You hit Valki, you immediately put Tibalt into play. So that's a 7-mana Planeswalker that you're getting from your Cascade card. And that's a really, really strong deal, right? It's probably the best fair card you can get. It's better than Ancestral Vision. You just put a 7-mana Planeswalker into play. That's really strong. Whether you want to play that in a fair way, just playing both the cards and trying to hit one off the other sometimes, or you want to stack your deck with cards like Brainstorm and Ponder to make sure you hit Valki, I think both are valid alternatives. So it's definitely something to explore in older formats. But I think just the fair use of this card, just being a 2 or a 7-mana split card, is already very valuable and will almost certainly see playing in Standard. In number 3, we have another god, and that is Kusima, God of the Voyage / the Omen Kill, or at least that's how I think you pronounce it. And that card is a mouthful, so I'm going to explain what it does to you rather than just read the card text. So on the front side, it's a 2 and a blue for a 2/4, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile it. Right? If you don't exile it, it just stays in play as a 2/4. and then next turn you can exile it again. You get this choice every upkeep. If you do exile it, it just stays exiled. And then it has an ability that is equivalent to landfall. That is, whenever you play a land, you get a choice. You can either put a counter into it or return it to play. Right? And you get this choice every time it is exiled and every time you play a land. So if you play a Fable Passage and you sacrifice it, then you get the choice the first time, and then if it's still exiled, you get the choice the second time. And when you return it to play, you get X plus 1/1 counters on it and draw X cards, where X is the number of counters that it has. So if you just exile it and play a land and put it back into play, you're getting a 2/4. You're not drawing any cards because it doesn't have any counters on it. But if you exile it, then you play a Fable Passage, say you put a counter on it, then you sacrifice your Fable Passage, get a land, then you bring it back. Well, now it has one counter on it, which you put previously, so it's a 3/5, not a 2/4, and you draw a card. Right, so this is a card that you can just leave in exile as you make land drops and you put counters in it. Eventually, you bring it back, as a 5-power creature that you draw 3. So it's a strong early blocker and potentially a strong finisher. The backside is a vehicle, which is 1 and a blue for a 3/3 vehicle with crew 1. And whenever you deal combat damage to them, you exile that many cards from the top of their library. So if you deal 3 damage, you exile 3 cards. It's usually going to be 3 damage. And then you may play lands from among those cards as they remain exiled. So it's sort of like a Smuggler's Copter, but not really, because it doesn't have evasion. It's blue, and it doesn't let you, loot useless lands into good cards. But it does let you, for example, use their lands and then play your double-faced cards as actual spells instead of lands, which you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have their lands to work with. And the reason I think this card is good is because both sides are just good. I think they do different things, but they're quite strong. It kind of feels like a Tireless Tracker / Smuggler's Copter split card, right? And even though it is probably worse than either of those, you get both choices. So that's a really, really strong card. And it is legendary, which is bad, but they also work so well together that you never mind drawing 2, because you can play 1 as a vehicle and then 1 as a creature. Then you use that to crew the vehicle, and you use the extra lands that you got from the vehicle to fuel the Cosima. So I wouldn't mind playing 4 of this card because it's just so strong with more copies of each other. And I think you can play this, for example, as a control card, right? You play it on turn 3, then you exile it, you play a Sweeper, right? A Wrath of God type card, Shatter the Sky. It's exiled, it's not gonna die. Then a couple turns later, you can just bring it back, and it's a reasonable size. It can block anything, it draws you 2-3 cards. This is just a very strong card. Right, and the fact that you can do that instant speed too. For example, imagine you have a Fable Passage. You have a Cosima exiled with 1 counter, you have a Fable Passage. Your opponent has a 3/3. They're not going to attack, right? Because if they attack, then you can just sack your land, bring it to Cosima as a 3/5, draw a card, and kill their creature for free. So they can't attack. They pass the turn. Once they pass the turn, you don't have to sacrifice the Fable Passage. You can just untap, draw, play a land, put another counter in Cosima, and then you're gaining an advantage. Like you're making Cosima bigger and drawing more future cards every turn that passes, while at the same time having an effective blocker. Even though it's not literally in play, it is stopping your opponent from attacking just because you can threaten to bring it back. So I think that's a really powerful interaction. And I think this can also see play in Rogues, even though it does cost 3 mana on the front side, so it does stop lures from working. It's just very, very good with what Rogues is trying to do. And because Rogues has a lot of cheap creatures to crew, the 3/3, so that's already something that is taken care of. But it's also a deck that really wants extra land some of the time. You have Ruin Crabs, just making landfall is good. You have expensive cards that you sometimes get to cast into the story. You want to cast something else in the same turn. And then you have spell lands like the double-faced cards. You have Agadeem's Awakening, right? That you can play more from your hand if you don't need to play it as a land as much, right? So I think the vehicle side can be quite good, and also milling 3 sometimes gets them closer to that, right? This is a deck that wins about half its games just by milling them. So if you get to mill 3, 6, 9 cards over the course of the game, that can actually speed your clock up by a couple turns. And then the Cosima side, I think it's perfect for those games where you can't be milling them because they have, Ox of Agadas, or because they're just have other escape, or they're playing 80 cards, like they're playing a Yorion deck, so milling them might not be a good avenue to win the game, because it is a card that you just played early. If it survives for 1 turn, you can exile it, and then you guarantee you're going to draw 2 or 3 extra cards over the course of the game. Sometimes you're going to draw 5 or 6, right? Especially because the deck is already playing Fable Passage. So I think this card just really does a lot of what Rogues is trying to do, and I'm very excited to play with it in Rogues, and I would probably just play 4 copies, even though it's legendary. In number 2, we have Doomscar. So Doomscar is a sorcery, it's 3 white, destroy all creatures, it has 4 tail, 1 white, which means that during your turn, you can pay 2 and exile Doomscar face down, and then at a later turn, you can just cast it for 3 mana. So Doomscar is one of the best sweepers we've had, one of the best Wrath of God variants, because it can be played on turn 3, right? And I'm not even talking about any, bluffing scenarios with other foretell cards. Just the fact that you can destroy all creatures on turn 3 can be extremely helpful if you are on the play. If you're on the draw, right? When you're on the play, they'll probably not have enough for you to kill, but then you don't have to cast on turn 3. But sometimes turn 4 is too slow if you're on the draw, and then being able to spin your turn 2, suspending this effectively, foretelling it, and then sweeping the board on turn 3 can be very valuable. And then there's the fact that, you can play some mind games with it, and your opponent is never going to be sure what they are, and they're never going to be sure what to do. Imagine a scenario, for example, where you're playing Gruul against a deck that could have Doomscar, right? So on turn 2, you play Burning Tree Emissary and Voltaic Brawler, right? That's 6 power to play. It's a pretty good turn 2. Your opponent foretells a card. You're like, well, at this point, what do you do on turn 3, right? You just attack for 6. Do you play your Kazana Mammoth? Because if you do, they can just untap and cast Doomscar immediately for 3 mana, right? And then you just have no board anymore. But if you don't, you get to attack for 6, and what are you going to do? Just pass the turn, not play anything? Then they don't have to play the Doomscar at all, right? They can just play something else. They can play a Fatal Push, and they've already gained control of the game because you had to skip your turn 3 so that they didn't get too much value from Doomscar. And this, again, is not necessarily about bluffing, right? Sometimes it's going to be a different card in there, but maybe you're sure it's Doomscar. Maybe they dropped it on the floor, right? Maybe that's the only card with foretell that they have in their deck. You still don't have a way to play around it. You either just commit more into a super that you know is coming, or you don't, but it's early enough in the game that if you don't play anything, then your opponent is just going to run away with the game. You can't afford not to play something. You basically have to expose yourself to the Doomscar that you know is there. So it's a kind of a catch-22 that wouldn't happen with a different Wrath, right? Imagine they have actual Wrath of God. Well, then at that point, you can play your Kazana Mammoth, and next turn you can attack for 11, right? That plus the 6 that you attacked for on turn 3 might just get your opponent dead. Right there on 3 life, you can then untap and play Questing Beast and kill them, right? So if it was a 4 mana Wrath, it just wouldn't be fast enough on the draw. But because it is Doomscar, it is fast enough. So I think the ability to play your sweeper on turn 3 is going to be a game changer in a lot of games where control is on the draw specifically, and I expect this card to see a lot of play, especially in Standard. In my number 1 card from the set is Goldspan Dragon. That is a 3-red dragon, 4/4 flying haste creature. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token. And then your treasure tokens have, you can sack them for 2 mana of any color as opposed to 1. So why is this card so good? Well, I think it's so good because once you play it, you're getting 2 mana back regardless of what happens, right? The worst case scenario is, well, you played, you spend 5 mana for a 4/4, they try to kill it, right? Immediately with something like a Heartless Act. When they do, you get a treasure, you can then sacrifice for 2 mana, and you can just play anything before their spell has even resolved. So imagine you have a negate in your hand, right? You play this, you try to attack, they kill it, you get a treasure, you sack it, you immediately play the negate. So even though you have no extra mana, you can protect it. And if they let you attack, well, you're going to attack, you're going to get your treasure. Then if they play anything on their turn, such as a sweeper, you have the negate ready, right? So it does cost 5 mana, but it basically costs 3 when all is said and done because you get to use 2 mana. In the same way that Chandra Torch of Defiance, you could plus it, and play a removal spell. You can do the same with the Goldspan Dragon, right? You can play it, attack, use your 2 mana to remove something, and then you have this dragon that basically only costs 3 mana on your turn and is threatening to do it all the very next turn, right? So I think this card is just extremely powerful because it just is so hard to deal with if you have anything ready in your deck, right? And you don't have to be playing blue. You can play a bunch of the green instants that give Hexproof, right? Or the white instant that give protection. You can use it with Embercleave, right? You can just, on turn 5, if you have 3 other creatures, you can play the dragon, attack with 4 creatures, and then use the mana immediately to play Embercleave. So it just opens up a lot of possibilities, and there's not a lot of counterplay. The only counterplay is just really countering it, because then you don't get the treasure to begin with. But the fact that if they target it at any point, you're getting the treasure means it's very hard for them to react to it. And especially because there are a lot of mana sinks right now, right? Especially in red, a card like Shatter Skull Smashing is a very good mana sink. A card like the Tybalt, the backside of Valky, as we talked about, is a very good mana sink. So it is threatening to just let you attack. You know, imagine you play this, you attack, you make a treasure. The next turn you attack again, you make another treasure. That's 4 extra mana you've gained, right? So you can cast a 9 mana card this turn, 10 mana card if you play a land. That's enough to kill anything they have with Shatter Skull Smashing. Right, so it is a very strong card, and it does work even if you target it yourself, right? It's not just spells from your opponent, it's also your own spells. So for example, imagine you play Goldspan Dragon. You attack, they try to kill it, you get a treasure, and then, you immediately play a card, I think it's Shard King Veil is what's called, and give it +1/+1 and hexproof. Then you get a treasure again. So even though that card costs 1, it's actually netting you 1 mana, right? A card like Boulder Rush from the Rimrock Knight, well, that costs 1, you target it, so you get a treasure, and then you get 2 mana back. So you're actually generating mana. You can use this as sort of, feather card with, a lot of cards that target your own creatures, and then you're going to get treasures from those. They're basically free or generate mana. So I think this will be a staple in standard decks in the future. I think a lot of the red decks are going to play it, and I think it's going to be a card that everyone's going to have to keep in mind because it does require very specific things to deal with it. It's already not that easy to deal with a 4/4 flying haste creature, right? None of the red removal kills it that you would like, but Stomp doesn't kill it, Scorching Dragonfire doesn't kill it. A card like Bloodstream Start is a sorcery, so it gets to attack and make a treasure before you try to kill it, then it makes another treasure. So it is a card that will force everyone to adapt, and that I think will potentially shape standard for a time. So yeah, these are my top 5 cards from Kaldheim, mostly when it comes to standard. And obviously I can't guarantee they'll be the best cards in this set when all is said and done, but they are the ones that are the most immediately interesting to me. So they're the ones that I'm going to be trying to make work as soon as the set is released, because they have the most potential. So I believe they're all going to be good in standard. I believe some of them have the potential to shape the format, but hopefully I'm right. If you like this video and want to see others like it, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I plan on having weekly videos that will help you become a better Magic player. Also, make sure to check out the Patreon to see if there are any extra perks you might be interested in. It's patreon.com/PVDDR. See you!